Tractate Beitzah, or as it's more commonly pronounced, Tractate Beitzah, discusses laws of object usage, food preparation, and the principles of muktzah, all concepts discussed over by the laws of Shabbos. Now here, how they uniquely apply to holidays, which have slightly different laws than Shabbos. Here, holidays specifically apply to the holy days of biblically instituted holidays, such as the first and last days of the holidays of Passover and Sukkot, and the entire holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The laws of the intermediate days of the holiday of Sukkot and Passover are more discussed in Tractate Moed Katan. Rabbinically instituted holidays like Hanukkah and Purim, while individually important, don't have the strict similar prohibitions of Shabbos apply on their days. The first chapter discusses a number of specific topics on this subject, starting with the laws of an egg which was laid on a holiday. The first Mishnah says, an egg that was laid on a holiday, Beis Shammai would hold that it can be eaten on the holiday, while Beis Hillel would say you cannot eat it or touch it. An additional point, you obviously cannot own any leavened bread, chametz, as it's called, on the holiday of Passover, as is lengthily discussed in Tractate Pesachim. Beis Shammai says the prohibition applies to leaven itself, with the forbidden amount being the volume of an olive, and with the chametz itself, the amount is the volume of a date. Beis Hillel would hold that both volumes are of an olive. Another dispute, there's a requirement to cover the blood of an animal with dirt after slaughtering it. If an animal was slaughtered on a holiday, Beis Shammai says you can dig up dirt to cover the blood. Beis Hillel says you can only use pre-prepared dirt, but if the animal was already slaughtered, you can then dig up dirt. And it says that the ashes of the stove are considered to be prepared, which is something that we're going to explain. The Gemara discusses the case of the egg and the logic of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel as to why they do or do not permit the egg to be eaten. One answer is that the hen in question was designated for egg production, and the opinion that does not allow eating the egg applies a broad application of the laws of muktzah, which prohibits handling an object which does not have a designated use on Shabbos or holidays, and they also apply the principle of nolad, that something that only achieves their current useful state on the holiday itself, for instance an egg born on that day, is a category of muktzah and cannot be used. The other opinion does not agree with these two principles. This is discussed, and there's variation on which we hold like. Some say holidays are stricter on Shabbos with these laws, as holiday laws are generally a bit more lenient, so out of concern that people might take them less seriously, we actually apply stringencies here by holidays. Some disagree with this entire explanation and say that the hen in question was designated for consumption, and the holiday in question fell out the day after Shabbos, so on a Sunday, and the issue is of the fact that it was prepared on a Shabbos, the day before, as this opinion holds that an egg is formed the day before it's laid, so according to one of the opinions, it can't be eaten. And then according to this, all eggs laid on holidays or on a Shabbos would be disallowed, even if it wasn't after Shabbos or before a holiday, as a stringency out of concern for the application of this exact case. The only exception would be when you slaughtered a chicken and found the egg inside, you can eat it on a holiday, as this is a rare case where stringencies don't apply. Another possible answer, the opinion that doesn't allow the egg, it's because it resembles a fruit that falls from a tree, and if you think the egg is allowed, you'd think that fruit is also permissible, which it's not, so these laws are combined. Another fourth explanation of the logic, the egg is disallowed as it resembles the impermissible practice of drinking juice that came out of a fruit on Shabbos or a holiday, so it's disallowed, as these laws are combined. It also gives individual logics as to why each of these opinions disagreed with each other. They're discussed a bit further. All of these different opinions are brought as to how they relate by different similar cases. There are additional points. It says an opinion that a debated egg case is possibly where it's a doubt if the egg was laid on the holiday, or perhaps on the days prior, but we still are strict and don't allow it to be nullified to permissible in a mixture of eggs, as it's permissible after the holiday anyways. There's also a mentioned case of eating an egg and its shell and the mother, and it says that the permissibility of the latter options is actually just an exaggeration. There are other similar cases discussed. It also brings up some related discussions, like if firewood fell from a palm tree on Shabbos and the next day is a holiday, you can't use it then as firewood, as a stringency to emphasize that the branches on Shabbos are actually muktzah. A related issue, if branches fall from a tree straight into an oven on a holiday, you can add pre-prepared wood and burn them. That's not a muktzah issue of moving the prohibited wood, as majority of the wood here is allowed, which is the wood you're moving. Deliberately nullifying the usability of an item which is prohibited, here the bottom wood, is not an issue, as this is only a rabbinic issue, so we don't need to be as strict. There are similar topics discussed onwards. There are also sources brought for this conversation. The sources are explained a bit, and it also discusses the permissibility of eating an egg that was laid on the first day of the holiday of Rosh Hashanah. to then eat it on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, depending on when the testimony for the new moon is accepted. Some say we disallow it to be safe. It's discussed. There's some points on burying a corpse on a holiday. Some say we only postpone until after, if the burial was not delayed and there's no issue of the body decaying. Others disagree. There are further points on the difference between the first and second days of holidays in regards to things like establishing an Eruv boundary and similar. There's also disagreement on an animal born in this period, and there are issues of muktzah. An opinion says that an egg is considered to be fully formed when it leaves the hen. There's debate as to what this applies to. We bring a number of suggestions, and it says that it's applicable by some laws of sales. The case of applicability would essentially be if somebody specifies that he wants an egg from a live hen, we presume he wants them to hatch chicks for breeding. So if the egg comes from the inside of a slaughtered chicken, which is not born normally, he would therefore be entitled to get reimbursement. A related case is discussed. Some say actually what the specificity is that if the greater part of the egg is laid, it's considered fully formed, which has relevancy if an egg is partially, majority, laid before a holiday and then goes back inside the hen and is then fully laid on a holiday. It can be eaten on the holiday because it wasn't considered laid on the holiday. Some say that it's actually considered formed only when it fully exists. There's some sources brought and discussed and points on the mating patterns of species of animals and how this relates to these laws. There's further discussion here and more points on covering the blood of an animal with dirt after slaughter. We said that the opinion which disallows digging dirt allowed it if you already slaughtered the animal. Some say that only applies if the spade was pre-inserted into the ground. It's by loose earth, so he's not crushing it, and he has no need for the hole, only the dirt within, so it's not a biblical issue. We also said that the ashes of the stove were prepared for use, which is a side point. Some say that this only applies if the ashes were burnt before the holiday, but it's allowed even if it was burnt on the holiday, if it's hot enough to roast an egg, as then it's not muktzah. There are some related points discussed. There's sort of discussion on particularities in these laws of covering animal blood. There's also a point on the forbiddenness of separating challah on a holiday. According to one opinion, you can't do it anywhere on a holiday, as a measure of sanctity applies to them, based on a proof. New Mishnah. Beis Shammai says you cannot carry a ladder between dovecots on a holiday, but you can adjust the ladder in a dovecot to reach a different window. Beis Hillel says you can move the ladder between dovecots. The Gemara says that this applies in a public domain. Now, unlike by Shabbos, you're allowed to carry things in a public domain on a holiday, but here the opinion disallows carrying the ladder in public out of concern that people will think you're carrying it to plaster your roof, which is not allowed. Beis Hillel says that's not a concern as the ladder is being moved against a dovecot. Both agree it's permitted to carry the ladder in a private domain, although this is disputed. Others say that the disagreement is on carrying the ladder in a private property, and the principal debate is whether we hold that we're concerned about people seeing you do something that looks like a wrongdoing, even in privacy. According to this, both would hold that the ladder is disallowed in public. There's also disagreement if you can replace the dovecot ladder. Everyone agrees that an attic ladder can't be replaced, although there's disagreement if you can adjust it to a new window or shift it over by shuffling the ladder legs. These opinions are debated further. The opinions on shoveling dirt on a slaughtered animal's blood and variation if the tool was stuck in the ground and their respective logics are further discussed. New Mishnah. You can't take a dove from a dovecot unless you predesignate the dove before the holiday. Beis Shammai says you need to physically pick up the dove and shake it before to prepare it for use, while Beis Hillel says you can just verbally designate the birds. The Gemara says that this dispute applies by the first brood of the birds, as people sometimes decide to put them back, which would be problematic, so you have to designate them. The opinions are further qualified. This brings a new Mishnah. If you designate white doves and find black ones, or vice versa, or designate 2 doves and find 3, they are not allowed. If you designate 3 and find 2 doves, it's fine. You can assume that one of the doves escaped. If you designate fledglings in a nest and the next day find the fledgling next to the nest, you have to assume those were 2 different birds, and you can't use those. You can assume those were yours if they're the only fledglings in the vicinity. The Gemara has an opinion that the case is where you designated black and white doves, and the white ones are in the place of the black doves, and the black doves are in the place of the white ones. You can't use either, as you can't just assume they switch places. It could possibly be different birds. The other cases are also qualified. There's arguments as to what the case is with the birds that are found right outside their nest. Some say you can just follow the majority by item proximity, and here the birds are majority birds of the rest of the world, so you can't assume they're yours. Others say the cases where the birds are on an actual ledge attached to the nest, so that principle wouldn't apply. So the case is that even if there are two of these ledges, one on top of the other, and you only designate the pigeons in the top nest, and then on the holiday you find no doves in the bottom nest and pigeons in the top nest, you can't use the top ones as the doves could have left and the bottom doves could have gone into the top nest. We also said if there are no other birds in the vicinity, it's permissible, even if they went from inside the nest to the ledge. We explained that this applies even where there's another nest 50 cubits away, but it's not visible, as it's around the corner of a building, as young birds don't hop farther than where they can see their nest. New Mishnah. Beitzah says you cannot use a pestle, normally used for grinding grain, to chop meat. Beitzah says you can. Beitzah says you can't place an animal hide where it'll be trampled, and you can't pick it up due to issues of muktzah unless there's an amount of meat on it the size of an olive. Beitzah says all of this is allowed. The Gemara says that both opinions agree that if the pestle wasn't used for chopping meat, it's muktzah and can't be touched. Obviously, a butcher's board is permissible, which is explained. There's further discussion in regards to hides. There's agreement that you can salt meat for roasting over a hide, but not if it's for cooking, which requires a larger amount of salt. There are some miscellaneous points on salting mentioned. It also mentions methods of salting more than what you need for the holiday. Some say you can just salt a bunch of additional pieces at the same time as you salt your piece of meat. Others would salt a piece, decide they wanted a different piece, and salt that one, etc. New Mishnah. Beitzah says you cannot remove window shutters for use on holidays. Beitzah says you can, and you can even replace them after. The Gemara says an opinion that this is shutters of vendor stalls, which are not connected to the ground. It also says that there are three things that were allowed according to the rabbis on a holiday out of concern that if they were forbidden, a necessary act wouldn't be done in the first place. So they allowed placing a hide where it could be trampled, so that people would prepare meat on holidays to eat, to replace window shutters on vendor stalls, so that vendors would keep their shops open on holidays, and also replacing a wound dressing on a Kohen in the temple. Some add others. This is all elaborated on further. It also discusses some specific types of window shutters with specific pivots. New Mishnah. Beitzah says you cannot carry a child, lulav, or a Torah scroll from a private to a public domain on a holiday. Beis Hillel allows this. There are some sources discussed. There's a rabbinic issue with separating teruma and ma'aser tithes from produce on holidays. Beis Shammai said we cannot deliver challah or meat gifts to a Kohen on a holiday, whether they were separated before or during. Beis Hillel allows either of these. The debate is if those gifts are comparable to the teruma and ma'aser tithes. The points on teruma and tithe delivery are discussed a bit further. There are some further points. It also gets into the method of barley kernel collection, the peeling and whatnot in regards to tithes, and how these laws apply on Shabbos. It says you may rub kernels of wheat on holidays. Some say only between your thumb and one finger, some say with your thumb and two fingers, others allow even between all your fingers. There are further points. New Mishnah. Beis Shammai says you can crush spices on a holiday with a wooden pestle, but pieces of salt must be crushed in an earthenware flask or with a wooden mixing spoon. Beis Hillel says you can crush spices as you normally do with a stone pestle, and salt must be crushed with a wooden pestle. The Gemara says the difference between salt and spices is that cooked dishes need salt, but not spices, or that salt doesn't start losing its flavor after being crushed. There's a practical difference between the two by either where you know before the holiday which dishes you are cooking and it was that needed spices, or if you're crushing saffron, which also doesn't lose flavor after being crushed. Some say that anything, even salt, can be crushed in its normal manner. This is discussed further, and some would say to lean the mortar on its side when crushing, and differences between a small or a large mortar. There are related incidents listed. New Mishnah. In regards to sorting on holidays, one of the forbidden forms of work on Shabbos, we said there's a possible exception by separating the food from the waste by Shabbos. Beis Shammai says that also applies here, but Beis Hillel says you can separate, however, with removing the waste from the food, either in your lap or with a funnel or a large plate, but you can't use a board or a fine or a coarse sieve. Rabban Gamliel says you can rinse the food in water and skim off any rising impurities. The Gemara says the point on using water to float out impurities only applies when there's more food than impurities. There are related cases discussed. New Mishnah. Beis Shammai says that the only gifts you can send to somebody on a holiday are readied portions of food. Beis Hillel says you can even send alive or slaughtered animals, wines, oils, flowers, or otherwise. He prohibits grain, which can't be used on a holiday, but others don't. The Gemara says that Beis Hillel actually wouldn't allow sending the gifts with a large party with 3 or more people. It's unresolved if we allow 3 people with 3 different presents. The opinion that allows grain does so because he holds that there are uses for grain on holidays, like feeding your animals or similar. New Mishnah. Further, in regards to things that can be sent as gifts on a holiday, garments, whether sewn or unsewn, even if they contain kilayim, forbidden mixtures like wool and linen together, as they have holiday needs. no sending sandals with spikes due to an incident mentioned in Tractate Shabbos, page 60a, or various unusable garments like an unsewn shoe, some say an unblackened shoe. Generally, if it can be used on a holiday, it can be sent to somebody without issues. The Gemara brings a few suggestions as to the use of a garment with kilayim, forbidden mixtures, in reference to stiff clothes that can be sat on. There are related points. Iri says the whole issue with spiked sandals. An unsewn shoe is still not allowed even if it's partially attached with pegs. There's argument by an unblackened shoe in regards to the necessity of smoothing it to complete it. Some say that the Mishnah meant at the end that something that can be used even on a holiday can be sent on a holiday, like tefillin. There's some discussion on tefillin and how to protect it while traveling if Shabbos starts, like to bring it to a nearby safe house if it's protected from thieves. But if not, if it'll only be kept safe from animals but not thieves, even if most of the thieves are Jewish people, you can't really assume that the tefillin would be safe in such a case, and you should just take them home. And that's the end of chapter 1.